In his final days, Padre Pio astonished those around him with his powerful last words, which seemed almost like a countdown to the end of days. A deeply revered saint, Padre Pio bore the sacred stigmata and carried these wounds with humility and grace, enduring a life marked by profound suffering and silence. His unwavering devotion to Christ was the guiding light through every hardship he faced. As he neared death, Padre Pio reportedly received a vision of Jesus, who spoke to him. By 1968, his health had deteriorated significantly, and days before his passing, though frail and gravely ill, he insisted on hearing confessions, wanting to die serving in his place of ministry. Often, he asked his fellow Capuchin brothers to pray for him, feeling uncertain about the time left on earth. Though unafraid of death, he sensed it drawing near. Months prior to his death, Padre Pio requested that an image of Saint Joseph be hung near his room. His confessor noted that Padre Pio would pause daily before this image in silent contemplation, later learning he had prayed to Saint Joseph for a peaceful death. Several Capuchins also mentioned that in the weeks before he died, the monastery of Our Lady of Grace was filled with a profound silence, as though enveloped by a mystical stillness. Unknown to many, Padre Pio was approaching his final days. In these last moments, he immersed himself in prayer, having dedicated his life to communion with God. From his childhood prayers to his solitary devotion, he prayed fervently in joy and sorrow, in health and illness. God was present in every action and thought in a way Padre Pio had long awaited, yearning to reunite with God. He once wrote to Padre Attino, saying, "Life here is a burden, a torment. The thought of losing Jesus at any moment terrifies me more than I can express." Shortly before his death, Padre Pio spoke to his superiors, asking them to pray for him and confessing, "When my time comes, if my Heavenly Mother is not there to take my hand, how will I have the courage?" A little after midnight on September 23rd, he made his last confession and renewed his Franciscan vows. Barely able to speak, he held a rosary, murmuring the names Jesus and Mary. Around 2:30 a.m., with his final breath, he whispered, "I see two mothers," and then passed away. These two mothers could have referred to both the Blessed Virgin Mary and his earthly mother Maria, or possibly to Mary, the Mother of the Church. In the months leading up to his death, Padre Pio's stigmata began to fade. The wounds on his feet healed first, with the attending Capuchins noticing a decrease in bleeding until his bandages required fewer changes. On the morning before he died, the scabs on his hands began to shed, and when his body was examined posthumously, no trace of the stigmata remained. His skin was smooth, with no scars, as fresh as that of a newborn. In death, Padre Pio appeared peaceful, a rosary placed in his hands along with a crucifix, and the Franciscan rule draped over his shoulders. His purple priestly stole wrapped around him, and helicopters flew overhead, scattering flowers and prayer cards over the massive crowd gathered below. It is estimated that 100,000 people attended his funeral. Padre Pio had often assured those who sought his guidance that he could help them even more from heaven than on earth. On September 22nd, the day before he passed, Padre Pio was especially weak. The church was packed with his prayer groups from around the world, gathered in San Giovanni Rotondo for an international meeting. He celebrated Mass that morning in gratitude for them and their newly official recognition by the Holy Office in Rome. The success of his prayer groups brought him profound joy. At the end of the Mass, as he left, he nearly collapsed, but his fellow Capuchins supported him. Preventing him from falling, Padre Pio looked at the assembly and, with a trembling voice, called out, "My children, my children." Later that night, he called for Father Polino to come to his room. When Father Polino arrived, he found Padre Pio tearful. Padre Pio only wanted to know the time, and after drying his tears, Father Polino returned to his own room. In his final hours, Padre Pio humbly asked his brothers for forgiveness for any hardship he may have caused and requested prayers for his soul. He then renewed his vows, pledging poverty, chastity, and obedience to God, the Blessed Virgin, Saint Francis, and the Church. Despite severe arthritis and advanced age, Padre Pio's gentle spirit shone through until the end. Bent over and weakened by the pain that made it difficult for him to walk, Padre Pio often relied on a wheelchair. Yet on that night, he managed to stand and walk with unexpected ease toward the terrace, needing no assistance. Once on the terrace, he stretched and turned on the light, something he hadn't done in a long time. Padre Pio then fixated on a particular spot, precisely where the Capuchins would soon place his lifeless body. Suddenly, he felt unwell and wanted to return to his room, but he was too weak to move. His face had lost all color, and he repeatedly whispered, "Jesus, Mary," his voice fading with each word. At one point, Padre Pio gazed intently at a picture on the wall, asking a nearby friar who was depicted in the images. The friar replied, "Those are photographs of your mother and father." Confused, Padre Pio responded, "But I see two mothers." Immediately afterward, he grew weaker, breaking into a cold sweat as his lips turned blue. Within 10 minutes, a doctor arrived and recognized that Padre Pio was experiencing a severe bronchial asthma attack. The doctor administered an injection and gave him oxygen, attempting to ease his labored breathing. Meanwhile, a Capuchin brother knelt beside Padre Pio, praying with profound reverence. Together, they recited the Lord's Prayer and the Hail Mary, their voices blending in solemn supplication. The brother quietly repeated, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I give you my heart and soul," invoking divine aid for Padre Pio's passing. As the sacred oils were prepared, Padre Pio received the last sacraments, fully conscious and aware of all that was unfolding around him. His body bore the fatigue of a soul nearing its journey's end. His hands and feet grew cold, and his forehead glistened with perspiration. Noticing the severity of his condition, the doctors gave him an injection directly to his heart, hoping to stabilize him. A Capuchin, sensing the finality of the moment, called to him, "Father, Father." Padre Pio opened his eyes one last time, offering a loving gaze to his brothers who had shared his holy journey. At 2:30 a.m., Padre Pio bowed his head and passed away, with his rosary clasped gently in his hands. Padre Pio, who was born in sanctity, departed in sanctity. His final thoughts were filled with love, a reflection of his lifelong desire to love God more deeply. He once prayed, "I need to love you more and more, but I no longer have love in my heart. I have given it all to you, If you wish for more, fill my heart with your love, then compel me to love you more and more. These words encapsulate his devout dedication, a love that had completely consumed him. 50 years earlier, Padre Pio was praying before a wooden crucifix when he was overwhelmed by numbness and drowsiness. He collapsed unconscious, only to awaken drenched in blood. Struggling to understand what had happened, Padre Pio dragged himself back to his cell, where he discovered the stigmata wounds mirroring those of Christ's crucifixion. From that moment on, these marks became a source of profound reverence and intense controversy. Some viewed the stigmata as a divine sign, while others were skeptical, suspecting trickery. It was as though Padre Pio was destined to carry this heavy burden from birth. When he was born, wrapped in a white veil, the midwife had told his mother, "This child will be a saint." Even as a child, little Francesco, as he was then known, displayed a profound spiritual inclination, captivated by stories of Christ, the Virgin, and the saints. He would retreat to quiet solitude, hearing distant yet familiar voices, as if heaven itself was speaking to him. But his path was not without trials. At one point, the Vatican imposed a strict order of silence on him, stripping him of nearly all his priestly duties and permitting him only to say Mass privately. Despite this heavy burden, Padre Pio responded with humility, saying, "God's will be done. The will of my superiors is God's will." In doing so, he exemplified true sanctity, not just through miraculous acts, but in his humble acceptance of suffering and unshakable trust in the divine will. During his years of isolation, confined to saying private Mass within the convent walls, he faced intense anguish, especially as his heart overflowed with compassion for those he could no longer serve. Despite his tireless dedication, Padre Pio faced relentless and unfair trials. Some in the Church, threatened by his growing reputation and holiness, turned against him, spreading false accusations that he was a fraud. These slanderous attacks reached high offices in the Vatican, leading to decisions that wounded his ministry. Limitations were imposed, and he was condemned by those who should have supported him. Throughout his life, Padre Pio endured unimaginable suffering, persecution, humiliation, false accusations, and condemnation, trials that could have crushed a lesser soul. Even as he prayed for relief from the stigmata, he never asked for the pain to be removed. He understood that this suffering was his cross, a reflection of Christ's own agony. For 50 years, he walked his own Calvary, marked by confusion, shame, and injustice. Yet in the face of this persecution, the truth of Padre Pio's innocence and sanctity eventually came to light. Numerous books have been written to document the depth of his suffering, exposing the malice of his critics and vindicating his name. These accounts highlight the purity of his intentions and actions, deeply rooted in an unwavering and profound faith. Transcending the physical pain caused by his stigmata, the near-superhuman efforts required by his pastoral work took an immense toll on Padre Pio. Despite this, the challenges and calumnies that assailed him only amplified his glory. His humility, perseverance, and devotion left a profound impact on the world. In 1962, during the First Vatican Council, dozens of bishops and archbishops visited Padre Pio, acknowledging the greatness of his spirit and his unique contribution to the Church. As the 50th anniversary of his stigmatization approached, Padre Pio sensed that his end was near. On September 22nd, after his morning mass, devoted followers gathered to see him one last time. Pale and trembling, weakened by years of suffering, Padre Pio gathered what little strength he had left to raise his cold, trembling hands and blessing to the crowd from the window of the old church. This final gesture of love and gratitude was indescribably moving, leaving a lasting impact on those present, as they waved and cheered, their joy mixed with the somber weight of the moment. Later that afternoon, Padre Pio gave his blessing to the faithful at Mass before retiring to his humble room, a silent witness to his prayers, struggles, and devotion. A priest present at that moment later shared a poignant detail. The window to Padre Pio's cell was closed for the last time, marking a solemn farewell to a man who had inspired deep reverence and love in countless souls. On the 23rd, at around 2 a.m., with a rosary gently held in his hands and the sacred names of Jesus and Mary on his lips, Padre Pio's soul ascended to heaven. He was 81 years old, and his passing marked not just the end of a life but the beginning of a legacy that would continue to inspire millions. A vast crowd gathered to pay their respects, and the monastery records indicate that this event was far more than a funeral. It was a celebration of triumph, a testament to the life and holiness of Padre Pio. Thus, his life in eternity began as one of the most beloved saints of modern times, venerated not only in Italy but worldwide. The path to his formal canonization, however, was not without challenges. It wasn't until 1973 that his cause for sainthood was formally initiated, and for a decade, no progress was made due to persistent controversies, as his name remained on a list condemned by the Holy Office. But divine providence had plans for Padre Pio, and it was Pope John Paul II who played a critical role in removing the barriers that stood in the way. Pope John Paul I, who had personally met Padre Pio in 1947, had long admired the humble friar and became a devoted supporter. Thanks to the Pope's intervention, the cause for canonization resumed, and on May 2, 1999, the long-awaited moment arrived when Pope John Paul II declared Padre Pio blessed, taking the first step towards sainthood. Ultimately, Padre Pio was canonized as Saint Pio, a recognition of the divine grace that had filled his life. Padre Pio bore the 5 wounds of Christ, 2 on his feet, 2 on his hands, and 1 near his heart, a mystical connection to Christ's passion. Although these physical marks attracted attention, it was not the miracles he performed that endeared him to people. Rather, it was his profound love for God and his deep compassion for humanity that truly captured hearts. His love consumed him, as his own words reflect, "I am devoured by the love of God and the love of my neighbor. God is always fixed in my mind and stamped on my heart. I never lose sight of him. I can admire his beauty, his smiles, his sorrow, his mercy, his vengeance, or rather the rigors of his justice." Despite the miraculous healings and extraordinary events associated with him, Padre Pio remained deeply humble. His only desire was to live as a simple friar, dedicating his life to prayer. He claimed no personal credit for the miracles that occurred through him. Viewing them as gifts from God meant solely for his glory. When his close friend Angelo Battiti asked about the miraculous events, Padre Pio simply replied, "Angelo, they are a mystery to me as well." This profound humility, coupled with his unwavering faith, distinguished him. An Italian journalist once wrote of the remarkable moral strength that seemed to radiate from Padre Pio's very being. "I was deeply impressed not so much by the stories of miracles people told about him. Padre's most alarming prophecy could be fulfilled at any moment. Following recent events in Spain, what is happening in this country is unprecedented and shocking," he said. Yet few have recognized that it might signal the start of something deeply unsettling. Throughout his life, Padre Pio made numerous prophecies, some documented and others passed down orally. Among them, the most notable is the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness, a warning that appears closer to realization according to certain signs observed in various places. Padre Pio also left instructions on how to act when those days arrive. Today, we'll explore the true meaning of this prophecy, and why recent occurrences in Spain hint that its fulfillment may be imminent, urging us to be prepared. Why does the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness instill such fear? We will delve into the unsettling details. The path to his formal canonization, however, was not without challenges. It wasn't until 1973 that his cause for sainthood was formally initiated, and for a decade, no progress was made due to persistent controversies, as his name remained on a list condemned by the Holy Office. But divine providence had plans for Padre Pio, and it was Pope John Paul II who played a critical role in removing the barriers that stood in the way. Pope John Paul I, who had personally met Padre Pio in 1947, had long admired the humble friar and became a devoted supporter. Thanks to the Pope's intervention, the cause for canonization resumed, and on May 2, 1999, the long-awaited moment arrived when Pope John Paul II declared Padre Pio blessed, taking the first step towards sainthood. Ultimately, Padre Pio was canonized as Saint Pio, a recognition of the divine grace that had filled his life. Padre Pio bore the 5 wounds of Christ, 2 on his feet, 2 on his hands, and 1 near his heart, a mystical connection to Christ's passion. Although these physical marks attracted attention, it was not the miracles he performed that endeared him to people. Rather, it was his profound love for God and his deep compassion for humanity that truly captured hearts. His love consumed him, as his own words reflect, "I am devoured by the love of God and the love of my neighbor. God is always fixed in my mind and stamped on my heart. I never lose sight of him. I can admire his beauty, his smiles, his sorrow, his mercy, his vengeance, or rather the rigors of his justice." Despite the miraculous healings and extraordinary events associated with him, Padre Pio remained deeply humble. His only desire was to live as a simple friar, dedicating his life to prayer. He claimed no personal credit for the miracles that occurred through him, viewing them as gifts from God meant solely for his glory. When his close friend Angelo Battiti asked about the miraculous events, Padre Pio simply replied, "Angelo, they are a mystery to me as well." This profound humility, coupled with his unwavering faith, distinguished him. An Italian journalist once wrote of the remarkable moral strength that seemed to radiate from Padre Pio's very being. "I was deeply impressed not so much by the stories of miracles people told about him. Padre's most alarming prophecy could be fulfilled at any moment, following recent events in Spain. "What is happening in this country is unprecedented and shocking," he said, "yet few have recognized that it might signal the start of something deeply unsettling." Throughout his life, Padre Pio made numerous prophecies, some documented and others passed down orally. Among them, the most notable is the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness, a warning that appears closer to realization according to certain signs observed in various places. Padre Pio also left instructions on how to act when those days arrive. Today, we'll explore the true meaning of this prophecy and why recent occurrences in Spain hint that its fulfillment may be imminent, urging us to be prepared. Why does the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness instill such fear? We will delve into the unsettling details. Padre Pio sent a personal letter to a Vatican commission confirming the authenticity of the revelations he received directly from our Lord. In this letter, he shared aspects of his spiritual life and the graces God had granted him, such as the stigmata. He also delivered a powerful message he had received. "My child, I have waited to reveal to you the deep love in my heart. Pray and make reparation in my name. Ask others to do the same. Persist in prayer so the enemy will have no power over you. Tell my people to always be prepared, for my judgment will come suddenly, without warning, and none will escape my hand. However, the righteous shall be protected." Padre Pio warned that many souls are falling into the abyss of hell eagerly, as if attending a masked ball or wedding celebration with the devil. "Help me to save these souls," he implored. "The measure of sin is overflowing. The day of vengeance with its terrible events is closer than imagined, yet the world remains asleep, clinging to a false sense of security. Divine judgment will strike like lightning, and the wicked and depraved will be destroyed without mercy, as were the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah." During these approaching difficult times, certain measures are advised to ensure physical and spiritual safety. Windows should remain closed and covered, with no one looking outside to avoid disturbing visions or hazardous situations. Lighting a blessed candle is significant, not only as a source of light, which, according to belief, will last several days, but also as a symbol of hope and spiritual protection. Frequent prayer, especially the Rosary, and reading spiritual texts are recommended, along with acts of spiritual communion and love to be carried out with humility and dedication. Leaving the house is discouraged, and preparations with sufficient food are advised, as this will be a period of isolation. Natural forces will manifest with great intensity, culminating in a rain of fire that will bring fear and suffering. Yet amid these frightening events, there is a message of hope. "Have courage, for I am among you." This promise is intended to strengthen faith and remind us that despite difficulties, we will not be alone. We will be guided and protected during this period of tribulation. This concern extends beyond people to include animals, as God, the creator and caretaker of all creatures, provides clear and compassionate guidance on safeguarding animals in these challenging times. There will be forewarnings, allowing caretakers to prepare and secure sufficient food for animals before any events occur. This underscores the importance of meeting the challenges ahead with readiness and care.